Right, everyone. Richard Andrew here from Learn Implement Share. I have the great pleasure of having with me all the way from Turkey, Helen Bowen on Zoom. And Helen and I have chatted a couple of times. We're on a very similar wavelength in terms of what's important with CPD and education generally. And we hatched this plan to have a chat about student voice and record it. And here we are. So I said to Helen, send me some bullets. So I've got these bullets in front of me, and this is going to be very much a sort of a free-flowing chat. But I'm very interested in what Helen has to say, and I know she's got a lot of good stuff to say. So welcome aboard, Helen.
Thanks very much. It's a real pleasure.
Let's start with a little topic called the importance and benefits of student voice. So should we start there, and then we'll break it down underneath that? What's some of the importance of student voice and the benefits of it?
I think for me, what is important is that we constantly reflect back on how this will help our students, how it will empower our students. And if you think about education, what is education about? Who is education for? It's not for the teachers. It's not really for the parents. It's for the students. And if we don't really understand their cultural context, their situation that they're going through now, which has drastically changed since we were at school, then are we able to provide the conditions and the education that they can access and that will be useful for our students in the future? So I think it's really important to make sure that they are involved, that we do listen and we do hear student voice. And student voice is such a huge concept. And I think it's important to have a concept of what that means as well.
Okay. You walk into a classroom as a principal or as a consultant, and you can tell that in this classroom, there's a lot of student voice. What is it about this classroom that indicates that there is some healthy student voice occurring?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you're looking at the classroom, and I think in classrooms, it's that students feel comfortable in their environment, that they feel comfortable to make suggestions with the teacher or the facilitator, that there is a sharing of experiences and a sharing of thoughts in that classroom, and that there is also an element of choice for students as well, that they perhaps have the kind of power or conditions to design how the lesson will look, what the product will look like, what the outcome will look like.
So there's a sense of control over what they're doing. They have you mentioned choice, and having choice gives you a sense of control over the way you're going to tackle an activity and what exactly you're going to do. But it's not, okay, kids, knock yourself out, do whatever you like about topic X. Do you agree that, and look, I don't know here, I'm sort of guessing, but that a lot of classrooms that have really healthy student voice are still quite structured?
They can be. And, lessons or schools or teachers that have clear learning outcomes. This is what we need. This is what you need to be able to do
Yeah.
at the end of this project, this topic, this year, this unit, this examination. How are we going to get you there? What is it that you would like to do to enable yourself to get to that end point in this subject, for example?
Because I think some people still believe that, okay, let's say I'm a traditional teacher and I'm just starting to get my head around student voice. Oh, so you're asking me to be laissez-faire, and I throw my structure out the window and I'm going to lose control over this class. And I think that's a bit of a mindset, especially in the mathematics domain. And it's so not true. Do you agree with that or not?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think for those examples, it would be start with something small. Start with maybe your plenary at the end and hand that over to the students. How are you going to show me today what you have learnt?
You tell them that at the start so they know they're going to need to pay attention and work out, and they're thinking about what they're going to say at the end.
Yeah, and just give a small time frame so that, if things do go pear-shaped as a teacher, that it's not the entire lesson that's been thrown. It's just that small section that you'll then need to, try and bring them back if you need to.
It's quite a transition, isn't it, to being a teacher who unknowingly isn't giving your students much in the way of student voice, or I like to use agency, same thing. And then to start, okay, like we're opening this up, I'm making my teaching a bit more student-centric. This is a sort of scary terrain here. Oh, now I've got to be more a facilitator. That's what they talk about being a facilitator. Oh, I've got to be sort of almost everywhere at once. It is a big transition. I think it's a bigger transition than a lot of educational gurus kind of make it out to be. They think that okay, this is what we want. We want student voice. Here's a whole lot of ways of doing it. Away you go. Hang on. It took me personally about a decade to make this transition. Now, I did it the slow way because I wasn't really getting much help, but it's a real mind shift. It's a paradigm shift, I think, but a fun one to take, because once you go there, you can't go back.
No, it is good. And I think there are some teachers who have so much inside them that they need to get it out, and it's passionate, and students are feeding from what that teacher's giving. And then there are some teachers who want to draw it out of the students.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a combination of both. It's sort of guiding those teachers that talk too much, but maybe in a passionate way, to sort of limit the time that they're talking. And also for those that, tend to want to try and draw it out of the students, well, okay, making sure that the students have a solid foundation to be able to be successful. So it's kind of maybe finding that balance in the middle.
And you talk balance, like so often I've worked a lot in the mathematics sphere, right? So there's the math wars, right? Which is like procedural versus conceptual. It's the most ridiculous argument you could possibly propagate for a month, let alone decades. This has been going on for years. Nobody should be teaching 100% procedurally or 100% conceptually. They both go together. Right. And that's just one example. And the human nature is to dichotomize things, to make them binary. Oh, it's one or the other. No, it's never one or the other. It's always a balance. And in student voice, the question that I would love to have been asked when I was a beginning teacher, Richard, how much of what you do promotes agency, promotes a sense of control in the students? And I would be going, none. Pretty much. And then it's a matter of tweaking around the edges. Or what can I do? Like you said, what can I do on a little scale that is actually going to increase that? Can I jump to, this really goes into enhancing student engagement through voice and choice. Enhancing student engagement through giving them a voice and choice. I'm really interested to see what you say about this, because this is a bit of a soapbox of mine too.
Yeah, I think, as parents now and as early educators, we are often saying to students, what would you like to do? What do you think about this? What should we do next? Which is your favourite? And there's a lot of questioning, and it's a lot about that personal, individual student or child. And then almost suddenly when they get into the middle school years, the high school years, this is what we need you to know. And
you were talking about toddlers.
I was, yeah.
Yes.
And so the way we have morphed with children and the way we deal with children, like when I was a child, I was told, go out to play, come back when the street lights come on. With my own daughter, we learned together. Oh, what would you like to do next? Let's go here. Would you like to go to the theatre? Would you like to see this music show? What foods would you like? Here's a plate of food. Just play with it. So our early education has changed quite a lot, but our middle school and high school education has not changed so much.
No.
It's still very much, this is what we need you to learn, and we're going to teach it you in this way. Well, I just feel that students now are conflicted because they've had this element of choice, and then suddenly we sort of say, well, now you haven't got any choice. This is what you need to do. And it's a way of drawing that choice still into the middle school and the high school, and saying, okay, well, what can we do that is going to really help support and guide you? What do you personally need to be able to be successful?
there's almost an attitude of, oh, these kids in middle school or junior high school, that they're not ready for choice. They need to be told what to do. And I think the toddler years frame of reference is a really good one, because there's structure there. Like, there's always structure about what we're doing, but there's so much choice in it. Like, no one teaches a toddler how to walk. You don't say, right, now, I'll get your balance now with your left foot, just move it slightly forward now, lean. No one does that. They
No.
learn through playing, through observing, da da da. And they're choosing at any moment whether they're going to give it a crack or not, right? And then they get older, and then we say, oh, they can't handle the choice. So I think which is completely wrong, or a misconception. But the challenge is, just give me some examples of how this can work in the classroom, and it's not that difficult to do. I'd like you to talk about engagement. So what's the relationship between engagement and student voice?
I think, again, going back to one of my earlier points, as to we need to be in touch with what students are going through now. What are their issues? What are their problems? What are their barriers? And if we can learn what the barriers are for them in this current moment of time, then we're able to provide those opportunities that the students will be engaged with. What is it that they do enjoy? In the school that we're at the moment, we still need to provide music lessons for our 17, 18-year-old students. So how do we make sure we are engaging those students?
Right.
We still need to teach a poetry unit. So how can we make sure that we are engaging our 17, 18-year-olds in poetry? Well, if you find out who their favorite sort of musicians are, and you look at the lyrics, and you break down those lyrics, and you sort of give them a classic poem, for example, or a piece of Shakespeare, and say, are there any parallels? What are the similarities? What are the differences? Can you take this sort of Shakespeare song, but can you make it into a rap song? Or, just sort of looking at how we are engaging those students through their choices of what makes them tick.
Right. So I think one of the least understood, simplest ways for engagement it's like, if you want to engage your kids, give them some choice, right? Be more student-centric. Because I've run a lot of PD programs, a lot of them online, and I have these little activities, particularly again in the maths area. Richard, I can't believe it. Last lesson Friday, I tried that little activity. That little activity, whatever it was, simply gave them more voice, the students more voice. I've never seen them so engaged. It was Friday afternoon, and it was a shock, because they didn't realize that embracing this kind of approach also increases engagement. But it's obvious when you really look at it. Like, I remember, I've got to go a long way back to my schooling, and I never had any, except for one example, I had never kind of any student voice type stuff. I mean, other than, we did art, and so you could do your own thing a little bit, I suppose, there. But I didn't like English, right? I love reading now, I love writing now, but I didn't like it back then. But in year 11, we were given this assignment, and we could choose a poem or a song or whatever and pick it apart and analyze it. Well, I was really into prog rock, so I had this King Crimson song, and I was, writing it down and unpicking it, and it was like unbelievably engaging. And all it was is I had some ownership over the activity. And that's just such a secret. It shouldn't be a secret, but I honestly think a lot of teachers don't realize the power of that, in terms, if we're talking about engaging your kids and having a much better time as a teacher. Because who doesn't want to teach a class of engaged kids rather than a class of either disengaged or just going through the motions, not inspired at all?
Yeah, and absolutely, the skill set that you learned through going through that process, you're still talking about it now, whereas how many lessons of formal English writing, you need to write a letter. How many of those do you remember?
It's actually the only thing that I remember in my entire English, or was there 4 years at high school and 7 years at, oh no, I do remember writing some stories in year 7. Right? I was writing a story, and I was drawing pictures and stuff. I got no idea what it was about.
Mm.
I remember that. But again, see, that's me choosing my story. They're the only two things I remember. Everything else, don't remember.
If we sort of open up this student voice concept a little bit further. So when I was at school, we had a student council, and we all decided that we wanted our high school students, our last 2 years of school, to not be in blue, navy blue anymore. We wanted them to wear the black uniform. And that was a choice that we made, and a difference that we had.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're now moving towards in schools is saying we need students to be involved in curriculum design. We need them to be at the tables when we have our discussions on the school development plans. We need their voice to be heard when we're talking about whether we have a digital strategy policy that allows mobile phones or not. And also part of, the sort of recruitment process. I've seen this very successfully done in the UK and in international schools as well, where students are part of the interview panel. And how you observe a teacher or leader interacting with students is incredibly telling. And then they also have a voice on who they would like to be part of their school community and their school culture. And I think it all links together with engagement. It all links together with choice, empowerment, personalization.
I interviewed an amazing principal called Doug Braiden. He's a Queenslander in Australia. And he took over Faith Lutheran College about 4 years ago and completely pulled it apart and started again, basically. And so what Doug explained was that the teachers were coming up with new courses. I think this was for the sort of year 10, 11, 12 kind of program. But they had to pitch it to the students. So there was this big pitching day where they had the hall, and Doug used to be a detective. So he had this course on, not quite CSI, but that kind of detective work thing. And he said, I was so nervous because you really want this thing to fly. And so you had to sell it to the kids, and the kids were coming around, and, the ones that got the highest votes, a certain number of the possible courses were eliminated, and then it went into round 2 and all that sort of thing. But the students are the ones who had to say as to which courses flew and which courses didn't. And the engagement, right there was fantastic. So, there's a lot of ways you can do this.
And they also feel valued. They feel that their opinion matters. And I think this is what produces confidence in our students, in what they're saying and what they're doing. If their opinions are valued, then of course their confidence is going to go up. And of course they're going to want to do more.
So you had a bullet point here, tools and resources for supporting student voice. Would you like to talk a little bit about that? Like if someone's listening to this and they go, yeah, I kind of need to head more down this path, what can they do?
I think a key one would be sort of the conferences and inviting those students onto board discussions. If we're talking about school-wide, if we're talking about teacher practices in the classroom, again, introducing those discussions. You mentioned something earlier about those two concepts in maths and that they go together hand in hand. It'd be really interesting to ask the students why, or should we, or what's which one is more important to you and why? And
the mathematics example, I think, is really easy. If you look at the way I used to teach, in the very beginning, I was doing what I'd been done to for 12 years, right? And so it was all procedural, and I'm just hoping that the kids pick up the understanding, but of course they don't. And so it's a real slog, except for your top class. Most of those kids can handle that because, they can, I don't know why, they can just sort of pick it up. But the general kid can't. And so it's simply a matter of, okay, Richard, we've got this next procedure or routine. What's the concept under here? Oh, okay, that's it. Let's create an activity for them where they can work in pairs and they just grapple. There's no procedure to follow. They just grapple with the concept. And it can be 15 minutes. It can be a worksheet, but it's not it's not step 1, step 2, step 3. It's like, here, match these up, or do this or do that, or an open-ended question is a really good one, And then you get them to play with that. And then you pull them in, have a bit of a workshop, and then say, do you reckon there's a routine or a procedure here, a formula we could come up with? What do you think? And so you create this formula, which you wanted to teach them in the first place, or you teach it straight out and they go, well, that's what we've been doing for the last 20 minutes, right? And then,
I think
when they understand
sort of,
it, they don't have anywhere near as much to remember. And you can't always do that. But if that's my approach now, sometimes I might go, right, in this topic, I'm just going to teach the procedures and then we're going to unpack the understanding later. It's just the way it goes for this one. But that's a choice. Whereas before it wasn't a choice. It was just the way I did everything. And I think that's the paradigm shift.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're asking students to become more analytical, more involved in decision making and the process of decision making, they have to kind of observe it. They have to kind of try it. They have to kind of then modify and adapt what they're doing. So that's one resource, if you like, that they are having a go. They are seeing it, they are modeling it and being involved in it. There are some other sort of guidelines. A great one that I came across when I was doing a unit on this for my master's. It's called the Spectrum of Student Voice. And it was designed by Eric Tashalis and Michael J. Nakula. I hope I'm pronouncing those correctly. And it categorizes the different levels of that student engagement in schools. And it's helping schools to realize that it goes beyond just saying, well, do you prefer auditory learning or kinesthetic learning? It's saying, why do you think we should have this in our curriculum? What benefit will this have on you as student learners? What are your opinions on this new resource? Do you think we should have it in school? That kind of thing.
Is that a bit difficult? Because you might have a new approach or a new resource or something that is left field from the traditional, and you might have kids who have had 8 years of fairly traditional teaching. It's like when I first said, right, we're going to do the student-centric thing, or I'm going to get you to think about these concepts. And then I'd get the pushback, right? And I'd go, sorry, you got no choice. This is what we're going to do. And in a month's time, you're going to thank me for it. But right now, you're not going to like it. I don't care. Because I knew we had to go in this direction because the kids just weren't thinking before that. This is in a maths context. So I just pushed through. And then, because then they start getting used to thinking, because they don't want to think initially, some of these brighter kids. Now they're thinking, now they're collaborating. Oh, Mr. Andrew, this is real fun. This is great. I told you. But if I had just gone, oh, do you want to do this? Nah. Just stay with what we got, right? I wouldn't have got anywhere. So I think there's a balance there. Do you agree? Or how do you navigate that terrain?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting concept. I mean, usually if students are asked for an opinion or a choice, they are really ready to take flight.
Right. So you've got to choose your audience.
Yeah, and some of the best examples that I've seen are with the Model United Nations conferences. I've taken a few groups of students, and the first group that I ever took, the students had no experience, did not know what the process was, didn't necessarily have confidence. But during the Model United Nations sessions, they saw what the other students were doing. And they really rose to that occasion. They wanted to take control of it. They wanted, because in the Model United Nations conferences, they do everything. They chair it, lead it, organize it, decide the discussion topic.
Conferences for kids that model the United Nations process.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they are fascinating, and the students get so motivated. I mean, it was what you were saying earlier about, their passions then come out and they realize actually that learning process is incredibly valuable to them, and they really appreciate the fact that they've been able to experience what they will need to face later on in life, no matter what they do.
So we might put a link in. Are these conferences held in certain countries, or how does that work? Or is it just something you do?
Yeah. Just going off on a side tantant, it's huge.
Well, I've never heard of this before, and I'm thinking maybe someone else who's listening hasn't heard of it either. So I don't know whether this is something that the school does it internally, or whether they fly their kids to another place where it's all happening, or what?
You can do many different things. When we first started out as a school, we did something internal. It wasn't official. We were just following the systems and the regulations of what's out there for the Model United Nations. I then took it a step further, and we joined another conference in a neighboring country.
Right.
And then the following years, we went to further afield. There's some incredibly big conferences. The main one is in The Hague, and then there's one in Washington as well. There's another really big one in Thailand.
Right.
And then you can host as well as a school.
So there's obviously a website. We'll put that in the links. Back to student voice. Not that was, well, it was still on the topic, but So have you got a couple of case studies or success stories you want to share on you witnessing or working with a school or in your own school and fostering student voice?
I think for a class example, I was a theatre teacher, so most of my comments have been aligned to the creative side. But when I enabled my students to become part of the assessing process, so they had the assessment criteria, other students would perform their pieces, and they then had to critique where they thought that they would fall on the assessment criteria and why, and then give advice on what that group or that student needed to do to move up to the next level. I think that empowered the students. It enabled them to learn how to give critique without offending. And we created very much an atmosphere of listen to what people have to say. What you then do with that information is your choice.
Yeah.
You can choose to take it on board, or you can choose to say, well, today that's not for me, but thank you for the advice anyway. So we had a very nice sort of sharing, collaborative classroom community. And I think through empowering those students, they gained a better insight for their own work as well.
What did you notice about that particular class after you first began to use that sort of student on student assessment process? Was there an obvious change?
I think our relationship improved between myself and the students, because again, they could feel that I valued their opinions and I valued their voice and I valued their learning, and I didn't want to impose my thoughts or conditions or my own ideas as such. I wanted them to grow and learn. I saw them investing more in what their role was as a kind of assessor. And then I also saw them, raising their game for their own pieces because they knew that they were going to be critiqued by their peers.
Do you have another one?
Another success. One success was with including students in this process of interviewing with teachers. And as I mentioned earlier, just seeing how potential teachers interact with students is a huge eye-opener and a really good way of...
What do you mean interviewing with the teacher?
So a lot of the international schools will do online interviews with a new prospective teacher. So we need a new maths teacher, for example. So we will interview them online. And a part of that interview panel will be a student, and they will be asking some questions about teaching and learning, about why they might want to come to the school, etc. And how that teacher interacts with that child or that student is incredibly telling, especially in an international global setting where you can't necessarily invite that teacher into school to see, really who they are. I just wanted to maybe talk about some of the challenges with student voice and maybe some of those resistance or fear almost. You mentioned a bit earlier about teachers who would say, why should I do this? It's the same for leaders and managers. Why should we include students in the decision making? What do they know, sort of thing? And for me, it's you never know what they will come up with. Maybe they will come up with something that's not relevant. Maybe they will come up with something that you hadn't thought of before. Or maybe they will come up with something that you suggested, but at least they will feel invested, they will feel valued, and it will help to keep things on a current sort of a track or a current context.
Can I share an embarrassing revelation that I had when I first ran some activities that were much more open-ended and allowed kids to work together. One might have been, you've got an A4 sheet of paper that you can make into a cylinder this way or that way, which is going to give you the biggest cylinder, right? So that is an example of a task. And there was this kid that I was watching, and I had written him off as being, well, he's like this in maths and he doesn't know much, and don't know. I was gobsmacked at his thought processes. And I thought, Richard, you have no idea what these kids can do because of the way I was teaching. So I saw the power of that kind of activity. And then, you listen in and ask questions, and it's amazing.
I mean, you need to ask students, who their favorite teacher is, who is the teacher that they dislike the most, and then you ask them why. And usually they are absolutely spot on with critiquing a teacher as to why they prefer a certain teacher to another type of teacher. Now, that's not for everyone, and every student is different. So you do need to get that, sort of broad spectrum of voices. But the way they talk, they can analyze, they can reason is actually usually spot on.
Yeah. So overcoming challenges. What's my challenge as a traditional teacher in any subject area? Like, what sort of challenges am I going to face in heading from what I'm familiar with into giving more student voice, and then maybe on an organizational level?
I think it's sort of putting some key questions out there. Why be a teacher? What do you want to do as a teacher? What is it or why did you choose to become a teacher? And
what did you sign up for?
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully that's going to be to enable students to be successful in the future, to make students be passionate about, my subject, to keep the power of science or maths or drama alive in schools. And if you can ask that teacher to reflect back on why they're doing it, and then ask the question, well, in the current context, what's the best way we're going to enable that to happen?
Do you know, can I throw something in? And this I could get criticized for this because it slots right into what you're saying, but I want to insert a little technically selfish attitude in there and say, right, I signed up because I love teaching, and I love that experience when all the planets align and I've started teaching this lesson, and then some kid says something and someone else says something else, and we head down this tangent that was really educational and worthy, and etc. Everyone's on the same page. We were just like cooking with gas. Sorry for all these Australian terms. And I walk out of that classroom thinking, I think that's possibly the best lesson I've ever taught. And most of that was unplanned, right? That's what I signed up for. Now, that fits into what you're saying, because if you can have a lot of that, the kids are going to be inspired, engaged. They had student voice in that thing. And that's my point. The only way that can happen is when the kids are feeling a sense of control, agency, able to contribute to the lesson. So I could look at this completely selfishly and say, well, I want more of that, right? It does fit in the broader educational aims because that's what we want anyway. So Helen, help me teach with more agency. Help me do my classroom work in a way that's going to foster more student voice. Because conversely, you've got kids who are there just going through the motions, or worst case scenario, actually disengaged and obstructive. So that's the opposite end. They feel completely disengaged. And then there's the trap. Sorry, I'm on a rant here. Then there's the catch-22. You suggest to me, hey, Richard, you're struggling with this year 9 class. Maybe we need to look at you stretching your boundaries so as you can foster some voice. I can't do that because I don't have them under control. And yet, and that catch-22 is the reason I don't have them under control, because they feel like they have no student voice. So yes, you might need to tighten some things up, but you give them some choice and you may be amazed. They might not all come on board, but you'll get most of them, and everyone will be having a much better, much more of a win-win. So anyway, a few little caveats in there.
I think, again, just going back to what we were saying, just don't think of it as a huge thing. start small, get those small successes.
Yes.
And when you've built those small successes and you've almost built kind of some rules for the students too, what's appropriate, what's not. We're not talking about, hey, sir, we hate your subject, you need to do better. You know, we're talking about, this has really helped me learn. Or I was able to engage more when we were doing this activity. Or I am feeling that I'm losing my focus when we are doing this.
So you're talking about asking for student feedback.
That as well. I mean, and that's part of this student voice. So having some student feedback, listening to their suggestions, but also engaging them in discussions.
Yeah.
Starting small. I mean, there's so many things, aren't there? But you know, doing what's in your comfort zone to start with.
Do you know, can I just throw this in as a maths teacher, right? I had this wake-up call years ago because you often would write up every part of every question you want the kids to do, and because a lot of textbooks they got, and this is like if you're just using, I didn't use only a textbook, but for the textbook work, right? And then I thought one day, what the heck am I doing? This is insane. I've been doing this for a decade, this is crazy. So it's like, right, kids, here's the rules, right? If you got to do at least 4 parts of every question and ask yourself, do I know how to do this, and do a couple of the harder ones. And if you know that move on. If you don't, do some more, right? If it's less than 4 parts, do half of them or round up. If there's 3 parts, do 2, right? And then, but don't do question 7, 11 because we don't need to do those, right? Away you go. But we could cheat. Yeah, of course you could cheat. If you want to cheat, knock yourselves out, but you're crazy. Why would you do that? That's got to be the most basic way to give students some sort of sense of choice. And that's also the most basic kind of maths teaching. But it works. And the kids are like, because they're metacognizing, if that's a word, that they're asking themselves, like, do I understand this or not? Oh, I need to do a few more. Like even on that level, it's amazing that even that would work. And it does.
Yeah, and I think just to go back to your personalized learning comment, for me, I learned more about spelling, for example, when I started to use Word, and the red squiggly line that I absolutely hated kept coming up with the same words. And I was looking, okay, well, what is it that I keep doing wrong? And I didn't get offended by the computer telling me that I'd made a mistake. Whereas if a teacher had been, scribbling red lines on my work, it would have made me feel really self-conscious, a lack of sort of motivation, etc. And so I had the power, the choice to choose which words I wanted to improve and which words I wanted to do better. And I think it's similar with ChatGPT, in that when I use ChatGPT, I become more exposed to more formalized language or a wider vocabulary. And actually, I'm feeding in this wider vocabulary. And then when I don't use ChatGPT, I'm actually able to write more articulately and use those words that I've learned through this medium. So, if a student feels that they can do well with a certain medium, why would we stop them?
Yeah. Again, it comes down to choice and voice. Helen, I think we should stop there. Otherwise, we're going to go on for hours and
all day.
Drop off the perch. Hey, great. Look, it's been awesome to chat. I was really, really interested in your input. It's such an important topic, more important than some people realize, I think. I think the problem with a lot of academic area, everyone's talking about agency now or student voice, and then it can become very academic and very complicated, and it's not that complicated. It's just like give the kids some choice, give them a sense of control in what the learning activity is or what the overall thing is,
and a sense of value,
and the sense of value. Yeah. All right, thanks for your time. That was very insightful, and maybe we should do this again sometime.
Absolutely, been great.
Beautiful.